The major differences in telecommunications, Canada versus USA. The Online Streaming Act Future Economics presents electromagnetic transmissions or radio and television waves are indifferent to sovereignty. Propagation is governed by physics, not frontiers. While mountains and curvature may create shadowing, space-based and high-altitude relays allow signals to traverse jurisdictions without regard to man-made boundaries. This is a Canadian issue, a tale of two remotes, Canada and the US differences, and Canada's cultural playlist. How the Online Streaming Act is keeping it Canadian, the goal behind the rules, America's mic drop, freedom of speech. The First Amendment is not a total free-for-all. These two neighbors, two different channels, two different types of control. When you look at media in North America, you see two neighbors with very different house rules. It's like they both have TVs, but one has a remote programmed by the government to make sure you see local shows, while the other gives you a remote and says, good luck, find what you want. Canada and the United States both regulate what you can watch and listen to, but they do it for completely different reasons. For Canada, the big mission is protecting its own culture. For the United States, the main event is protecting free speech. It's a fundamental split that shapes everything you see on your screen. This isn't just a small disagreement over policy, it's a deep philosophical divide. Think of Canada as a country that's always been aware it lives next door to a cultural giant. To keep from being completely overshadowed, it actively works to carve out space for its own stories, its own music, and its own voices. The United States, on the other hand, was built on the idea that the government should keep its hands off speech as much as possible. It's a country that trusts the marketplace of ideas, believing that the best or most popular content will naturally rise to the top, even if that means one voice gets much louder than all the others. So, on one side of the border, you have a system designed to act as a cultural gardener, carefully tending to local plants to make sure they get enough sunlight. On the other side, you have a system that's more like a wild forest, where everything is allowed to grow, and the tallest trees get the most light. Both approaches have their own logic and their own consequences for what citizens end up consuming. Understanding this core difference is the key to unlocking why their media landscapes look so distinct, even when they share so much of the same content from global streaming giants. So, how does Canada actually do this? How does it protect its culture? One of its biggest tools is a law called the Online Streaming Act. In simple terms, this law updated Canada's old rules for the internet age. For decades, Canadian radio and television stations had to follow certain rules. They made sure to play Canadian music and air Canadian shows. But then streaming services arrived, Netflix, Disney+, Spotify, and they didn't have to follow those old rules. The Online Streaming Act was created to change that, bringing these global platforms under Canadian regulation for the first time. The power to enforce this act belongs to the CRTC, the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission. Think of the CRTC as Canada's media referee. It's their job to make sure everyone in the Canadian media space follows the rules. Now the CRTC can go to a giant streaming company and say, "You make money from Canadians. It's time you contribute to our system." This shifts power from hands-off to much more involved. What does that contribution look like? The CRTC can require platforms to put money into funds that help create Canadian movies, TV shows, music. But why go to all this trouble? The main goal behind Canada's rules is something called cultural sovereignty. This is the idea that a country should have the ability to protect and promote its own culture and identity, independent of outside influence. For Canada, with its relatively small population of about 40 million people living next to the United States, with over 330 million, this is a serious concern. Without these kinds of regulations, Canadian airwaves and streaming libraries could easily become filled almost entirely with American content, simply because the US produces so much of it on such a massive scale. These rules are not about saying foreign content is bad or trying to build a wall around Canadian media. Far from it. Canadians watch and love American shows, British dramas, Korean films just like everyone else. The point is not to exclude others, but to include Canada. The regulations are designed to ensure there is a space reserved for Canadian stories, told from a Canadian perspective, reflecting Canadian experiences. Now let's cross the border and look at the United States. United States First Amendment. The approach here is almost the polar opposite, and it all starts with 5 very famous words from the US Constitution. Congress shall make no law. This is the beginning of the First Amendment, a foundational rule that severely limits the government's power to regulate speech. In the American view, the freedom to express yourself and to listen to whatever you want is one of the most important rights a person can have. This principle is applied very broadly to media, which is why the idea of the government telling Netflix what to promote would be highly controversial. Because of the First Amendment, the US government generally takes a hands-off approach to the content on streaming services and online platforms. Companies like YouTube, TikTok, Hulu have immense freedom to decide what they host, what they promote, what they take down. There is no American equivalent of the CRTC that can force these platforms to fund or feature American content. Even with its strong free speech protections, the United States isn't a complete regulatory wilderness. The government does have some power over media, but it's very specific. This is where the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, comes in. The FCC is the American regulator for media. Its power is mostly limited to what travels over the public airwaves, traditional broadcast radio television. The logic is that the airwaves are a limited public resource, like a national park. So, what kind of rules can the FCC enforce? Unlike in Canada, these rules are almost never about promoting American culture. Instead, they focus on decency standards. The FCC prohibits broadcasting indecent or profane material during hours when children are likely watching. In the end, what we see are two neighboring countries taking two very different paths to regulating the powerful world of media. Is this approach better than the other? They are reflections of different histories and different national priorities. Canada, with its eye on cultural survival, has chosen to be an active participant in its media landscape. It uses regulation as a tool to ensure that its own stories are funded, produced, seen, treating media as a cornerstone of its national identity and a public good that needs to be nurtured. The United States, guided by its deep-rooted commitment to free expression, has chosen a more hands-off path, especially in the digital realm. It places its trust in the First Amendment, believing that a free marketplace of ideas. Future economics academic note: Royal assent occurred on April 27, 2023. Royal assent is the final constitutional step required for a bill passed by the Parliament of Canada to become law. It signifies approval by the Monarch of Canada, a function that is almost always performed by the Governor-General of Canada, acting on the Crown's behalf. This information is part of the FEA structure. FE8, Pillar 0, is American domestic structural governance.